Croeso I Goel Digidol Agetli. Welcome to Hay Festival Digital, and thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Andy Friars, and I am the Sustainability Director here at Hay Festival, and the one who's responsible for the Trans.MISSION II project, which we've been running in partnership with the Natural Environment Research Council. They are UK's largest funder of independent environmental research, science research, training and innovation delivered to universities and research centres. The Trans.MISSION II concept was to bring together scientists and artists to find new ways of communicating science to wider audiences. And it follows on from our successful project with NERC Transmission, which we ran two years ago. And you can see videos which were produced from that on our YouTube channel. That would Transmission focused purely on the UK, but with Trans.MISSION II, we wanted to sort of look at where we were based around the world, and also where NERC funded research as well. And we chose 3 locations for Trans.MISSION II: Peru, Colombia, and here in the UK. Today's event is looking at the Peru part of that project. And there were three key people who took part in Trans.MISSION II in Peru. We had Erika Stockholm, who is the artist, the author of the story, who will be joining us on video in a bit. Raul Muro, who is the Peru-based scientist, and also Jemma Wadham. Jemma Wadham will be joining us live very shortly. She is the Professor of Glaciology at the Cabot Institute at the University of Bristol here in the UK. She researches hydrological and biogeochemical processes that occur within glacier and ice sheet systems and their forefields. She's published over 100 scientific articles and book contributions, and is currently leading fieldwork on glaciers in Peru, Chile, Greenland, and the Himalayas. Welcome, Gemma. Welcome to Hay Festival Digital.
Hi, Andy. Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much. Can you just start by telling us a bit about the research? What is the research which you're undertaking in Peru at the moment?
Sure. So the research is part of a big program which is linking the UK with Peruvian scientists. Our project is called Cascada. But the project itself is to study the impacts of glacier change in the Peruvian Andes in the Cordillera Blanca, which contains most of the glaciers in Peru. So you may be surprised to realize that actually there's a lot of glaciers in the tropics. And as you can probably imagine, it's not a brilliant place for glaciers in the tropics because it's warm. So they're kind of quite high up in the mountains. But in the Cordillera Blanca in Peru, warming at rates which are higher than the global average means that these glaciers are retreating quite quickly. Actually, they've lost about 30% of their area in the last few decades. And that's really important because these glaciers, they're nourished by snow during the wet season, and in the dry season, they melt and they provide water to local communities. What the problem is as those glaciers retreat, there's less and less water. So our project's studying how that water is declining, but there's a second problem in Peru, which is as these glaciers retreat, they're retreating over very metal-rich rocks. Those rocks get washed by the rain, they get open to the atmosphere, and they're releasing metals and a lot of acidity into the rivers. So some of these rivers are now about pH 2 or 3, that's about the same acidity as your stomach, with very high concentrations of heavy metals. And so we're trying to understand, as these glaciers retreat, are you going to have much more toxic waters in rivers and lakes? And is it going to cause major issues for quite a lot, thousands of people in that particular region? So our project aims to understand, which rivers are going to become toxic in the future, and also what are we going to do about it? So what's the solution? So our partners in Peru, Raul Loayza Muro, he's actually looking at how can you solve the problem? Can you start to construct artificial wetlands on rivers which take the metals out of the water and neutralize the acidity and can return clean waters to local communities in that region? So it's quite an applied project.
So these are naturally occurring heavy metals. This is not something which we've put there and has been revealed. They are just naturally occurring.
Yeah, that's correct. So the glaciers in the Cordillera Blanca, they're sitting on top of these old rocks which are rich in things like iron, lead, arsenic. But those minerals are present there naturally, but as the glaciers are retreating, they're being released from the rocks, actually, because the glaciers crush up the rocks to a very fine powder. They leave them strewn in their forefields as they retreat, and then they're washed by the rain, and the metals and the acidity come out of the rocks. But it's essentially a natural process, but triggered by essentially climate warming and glacier retreat in this case.
So is it already having a direct impact? I mean, are there, I mean, you said you're looking at, you're expecting it to get worse, but is it already having a direct impact on those, on the lakes and also on the people who live around that area?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if you talk to some of the local people, 20, 30 years ago, they were able to fish in some of these lakes and rivers. And if you now go to those lakes and rivers, I mean, the rivers are bright orange from rust, basically iron falling out of the water because there's so much of it. And the lakes are kind of green, murky green, nothing really living in there. So, you know, they can't fish anymore. And actually some of the rivers, which are quite important in supplying water to those communities, you certainly wouldn't want to drink them because they're so acidic and they contain heavy metal concentrations above World Health Organization standards.
What sort of numbers of people are we talking about being affected around that sort of glacial region?
Well, at the moment, it's probably quite small communities of people, but people in that region are living in quite vulnerable places. So up on the mountainsides, quite up close to the glaciers in some places. So they're kind of scattered everywhere. And they're very, very dependent on glacial meltwater, particularly in the dry season, to survive. So that's important to them. But actually, if the problem becomes worse and more of the rivers become toxic, I mean, the population of Huaraz, which is the main town in that region, is sort of 250,000 people. So, you know, we're talking significant numbers of people if all the water went toxic. At the moment, it's a few isolated spaces, but the predictions for glacier retreat in the region are that, you know, by the end of the 21st century, most of them might be gone. So then all of those metal-rich rocks are exposed. So it's potentially quite a you know, disastrous situation.
And you talked about Raul and the work he's doing. So what are some of the potential solutions for trying to at least mitigate some of those issues? Clearly, it's going to be difficult to stop them, but how do we mitigate against them?
Yeah, well, what Raul works on is he's working actually with local communities directly in that region. And what they've discovered is that if there are a lot of plants that are kind of native to that region, which are very tolerant of metals, and in fact, they'll take the metals out of the water, which is a good thing. And so what he's looking to do with these local communities is to build artificial wetlands where you channel the water through these kind of tortuous channels, and you put these Andean native plants in the channels, which will take the metals out of the water. And so that by the time the water's gone through this artificial wetland, it's essentially been remediated to some degree. And I think what we're interested in is to what degree can that kind of solution be implemented at a larger scale. So we're working with the local communities to sort of test how these wetlands could work, you know, to what degree can they be affected, and how could you roll them out perhaps over a wider region to solve this potential problem.
Okay, so I mean that's a great background to what the science is and what you were doing out there. So you were I phoned you in last June on the basis of being given your name through NERC as someone who would be interested potentially in becoming involved in this Trans.MISSION II project. Why were you interested? I mean, you're clearly very busy. You're investigating glaciers all over the world. You've got your students to teach. Why would you want to get involved in another piece of work essentially outside of what you would normally be doing?
Yeah, no, sure. That's a good question. So the true answer to that question is, in the last year for me, I've come to feel quite passionately about communicating stories of research in a more accessible way. And part of that for me was about 18 months ago, I went through emergency brain surgery to remove a tumour from my brain that nearly cost me my life. And I came out of that, and I was actually on sick leave, I think, Andy, when we first discussed this, and I'd seen the advert for the Trans.MISSION programme, and I think over the months of having time off work, I'd started to feel really strongly, actually, about the natural environment, but also trying to find new ways to communicate what we're talking about and get the messages across, because it is quite a disastrous situation, particularly in terms of glacier change and climate warming. So when this transmission opportunity came up, I thought, yeah, let's do that. And I really felt quite passionately that I needed to get out there and start talking with this sort of second life that I suddenly found myself with. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a strange story.
It's and also, I say you didn't tell me, did you, when I phoned you in June, that you were on sick leave? So that only came out later on. But yes, I think what you said later was that near brush with death gave you. You just said, I just want to do new things. I want to get out there and actually experiment more and get involved more with things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, we worry a lot about risk, don't we? Personal risk, whatever kind of risk you might call it. But I think when you've been through quite a big situation where, your life was threatened, the word risk takes on an entirely new meaning. So risk to me, I mean, I've done some acting through this program, which we'll probably talk about, but risk to me is a new meaning now. And I kind of felt, well, A, that's got a new meaning, and B, actually, I think we do, as scientists, need to talk about our science in a way that is understandable by everyone, because that's how we will actually manage to change things.
Because that was one of the interesting come out of this process is that, and you can explain this, but the fact that as a scientist, you train to remove all emotion from your work. You don't put emotion in, and when it comes to communicating, of course, we need emotion. That's how we sell stories. That's how we sell what we're working on.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and that's why this whole process of transmission has been an interesting process for me, because what we've done is we've tried to create a story which has an emotional dimension to it that connects with people's hearts, not just their minds. And for me, that's a new thing actually as a scientist. So I think all my career, I've been taught, you stick to the facts, do not go beyond the facts, and avoid emotion or any kind of emotional portrayal of the facts. And yet we're in a situation now, and I think people tend not to make changes in their lives or do things in their lives unless they've connected somewhere here rather than just in their minds. And so for me, that was an interesting thing to be exposed to, and I think I probably changed through the process as well.
Because I mean, when you're teaching your students, you are telling stories, so that you're already learning how to do that. So, is this something which you are using some of these skills which you picked up through the project?
Yeah, I mean, when Erika and I first started chatting, I remember our first conversations, we realised that we were both actually storytellers. I tell the stories of science through facts and figures, and she tells her stories, conveying human emotion and stories that are very much more personal in nature. And that was an interesting learning to me. And I think what I'm now doing is I'm really interested in finding ways to tell those stories. So I'm actually, since the brain surgery and sick leave and all that, I've now written my first book for a popular audience, which is about glaciers, telling the story of glaciers, why they matter, how they work, what's going to happen to them, and essentially what's going to happen to us. It's my own personal story as well, which felt a risky thing to do, and that's going to be published next year. So I think this whole process of transmission and acting and being part of a different type of story has led me to want to create my own stories on a much bigger scale.
So before we sort of bring Erika in, there is your partner is Raul, in terms of the scientist who you're working with, and both Raul and Erika are in Peru. So it's, I think, 4:30 in the morning at the moment there. So it was unreasonable to expect them to get up for this, but they have both sent us contributions via video. Raul is a specialist in ecotoxicology, and he's based in Peru at the Universidad Peruana Cayetano Heredia. I think my Spanish is not up to what it should be. I asked him to speak about his involvement in the project.
I joined Trans.MISSION II because this is a very exciting project that brings together the talent and the experience and knowledge of filmmakers, of illustrators, of storytellers, and also scientists from many different fields to build together a powerful and strong message that can be delivered to all audiences with the objective of raising awareness and also knowledge in a very simple language around concerning problems like global warming, air and water pollution, glacier melting. And this makes me think and realize that arts and sciences have a lot of commonalities, but perhaps they use different languages. Arts, of course, are meant to touch the heart of people through colors, through shapes, through sounds. And on the other hand, science, it's written in a very cold and precise and strict language, which is not always meant to move people on their hearts, but yes, to move people to take action. So this is a very, very good opportunity to see that they both can work together in a very strong way, like a team. And this was what happened to me when working with Erika Stockholm and, of course, Jemma Wadham in the story about the dying glacier of Chayap in the Cordillera Blanca in Peru. This taught me that I was able to step out of my comfort zone, which is something that scientists are not always used to do, and to express my emotions with the common objective of transmitting this strong message to people and to motivate people to take action around this very, very concerning and urgent problem, which is glacier retreat because of global warming. Scientists, we are, I think, storytellers in some way. We perform every time we give a conference, we give lectures, but of course we do it in a very strict language. But in this case, I think I will introduce in my speech all this emotion and how to touch my students and all other audiences to know and to recognize there are many problems that they are taking part of and they are involved in and that they can take action. At present, our project, which is called Cascada, is working well in the Andes of Peru. We were able to finish our last sampling in February before the pandemic. So perhaps there will be a short delay before our friends from the University of Bristol return to Peru, which they love, and of course we love to have them here and work together in the field in the Andes. But I'm sure that in the meantime we will be doing some progress with discussions, analyzing data and others. So this has been a very, very nice experience for me, and I hope we can continue performing this play.
Thank you, Raul. Gemma, perhaps you could just talk a little bit about the process that you went through. We've talked about Erika Stockholm. We've now met Raul as well, and we'll be meeting Erika soon. But can you just talk a bit about the process you went through, how you and Erika and Raul worked together to develop this new way of communicating the work, your scientific research?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the process is interesting because I was sort of stuck in the UK and they're in Lima, and we're kind of lots of bombardment of messages and stuff between countries. But it all started actually last summer when I was in Peru, so last August, and I met up with Erika for a coffee under very gloomy Leman skies, and we started to discuss. I started to explain the scientific story to her, and she kind of listened. So that's really interesting, and then we kind of talked about how can we give this meaning, how can we give it human meaning, give it a more emotional slant to it. And her idea was, we make the glacier talk about itself in the first person. So, you know, that whatever is happening to the glacier is like it's happening to a person. And so we kind of started to exchange emails, and she wrote stories, and then Kai wrote stuff, and then Raul chipped in as well. And eventually we came to this story that Erika was going to narrate. And in the end, we decided to go beyond just narrating it. Actually, when we stood up and did this at the Hay Festival in Arequipa, we decided to kind of act it like it was a short play. And I remember at one point saying, I could become the glacier. And then that actually, I ended up becoming the glacier in this play, and everything that happened to the glacier essentially happened to me. But the process is very interesting because we were just in such different time zones, and there was a time pressure as well. But it was a really enlightening process that I really loved.
So, I mean, had you done much in the way of acting before? I mean, was this, you've obviously gone into science, you've done science research. I mean, were you in Amdram or anything? Was it, what was your background when it came to these kinds of storytelling?
No, I've never acted in my entire life. In fact, I remember at school when I had to do drama classes, I absolutely hated it. In fact, the only thing I was good at was falling over and being dead, because then I didn't actually have to say anything. So now I've always shrunk away from it. Interestingly, my mother was a professional actress. She gave it up to my father in her early 20s, and I've kind of always been interested, is there any of that in me at all? And I was curious to try it. And I think for the last year, I've been less worried about risk and personal risk. I thought, well, let's just give it a go and see whether any of the acting stuff is in me somewhere. It was an interesting process.
No, and I think the fact that actually what the personal connections and what you all brought to that play really with people who saw that. I'm going to bring in Erika now. Erika Stockholm is the Peruvian writer and theatre producer and actress, and she's president of the Asociación Cultural al Centro por Primera vez. She's published 10 children's books. And I asked her to talk a little about why she got involved in the project and how she felt and what she learned working with Gemma and Raul.
I've been to Antarctica before, so I've seen glaciers in the past, but I didn't know anything about glaciers in Cordillera Blanca. And I totally ignored their actual situation and the tragic result of them being melted. I learned a lot with Gemma and Raul, the scientists. I normally write stories, especially for children, and then turn them into theater plays for general public. At the beginning, I wasn't so sure what I was expected to do until I met Gemma. She had a stay over in Lima because she was going to the Cordillera Blanca. So we had lunch together and we talked about the project. And she was as lost as I was. That made me feel so confident. I asked her to explain the situation of Glacier Shaya, and as she talked, I understood that Gemma, as a glaciologist, was deep in her heart a glacier herself. And that gave me a starting point. So I asked Gemma to write some lines about the glacier, but as if she were a glacier, Shaya glacier. And I told her to be in first person and to deliver the message as if the glacier wanted to talk to the world. So she made some sketches, some beautiful drawings, and she wrote the first lines. And on top of that, I created the story as you know it now, and afterwards the play. Art can be inserted in any discipline. The clue is discovering the way in which it converges and synergizes with science. I really needed the scientists for the story to be realistic and to send a true message to the public. If you pay attention, you discover that science and art merge and they work in harmony with nature. You can see it everywhere. The beauty of a leaf, or in the Fibonacci proportions of a simple flower. I knew that the best way to get into the soul of people is performing in a scenario. A written story would work too, of course, but it takes one more step. You have to see it and you have to read. And the idea of incorporating live music inspired in the region felt great. At the end, your work reflects what you are. Your experiences are part of it, and your hopes and your fears. This project moved me, and I understood that nature, when it's mistreated, can be very fragile. But the problem here is that we are part of nature, so who we are really destroying is ourselves. It was a great experience working with Gemma and Raul, and I would love to work with them again. Scientists are cool. After the story launched in Arequipa, by the way, I have to tell you that Gemma is a great actress. We were asked to perform in the British Embassy in Lima, so we did. And it was quite an experience, especially for the public. The majority were very pleased, but it was interesting to hear the opinion of one lady that said that we should be more positive in our final message, that she wasn't going to stop using her car or stop traveling in airplanes, that was just impossible. And I asked her what her profession was, and she told me that she was a business woman. So I understood why she wanted us to change the real message, because money, business, they don't want to hear the real stuff. Well, after that, after the lockdown, because of the coronavirus, her words came back to me, and I thought about her without traveling and without using her car. Incredible. Well, Andy, thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you for being here and listening and sharing. Goodbye. Have a nice day.
That was Erika Stockholm, the author and writer who was part of the Trans.MISSION II project here for Peru. And as you can tell, she's a character and brought a huge amount of energy and life to the project. It was. I was thinking when she was talking, Gemma. She was saying that she didn't really know what to expect and what to do with the project. And when she met you were the same. And I think one of the things that I'm really pleased about is that I deliberately, when we first set you off, tried to make sure that it was as open as possible, so that you could explore and find what works, rather than trying to have boundaries around, you must do this or must do that. I mean, clearly there was some criteria, but in general, it was open to allow you and Erika and Raul to play, to explore, to find the things which actually worked. And I'm personally really pleased that came across right at the beginning. You really didn't know what you were doing, but by working together, you produced this amazing piece of work.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think at the start we were both lost. We just didn't really know what we were supposed to do, and I don't think we really realised that was part of the point. But because of that lostness, and that blank space, we were able to create something in the middle of it that was kind of authentic and came from us and where we'd come from and what we were interested in. And then, of course, I never in a million years expected it to end up as a play and me being on the stage with a blue wig and dancing around as the Glacier and then dying as the Glacier. And I think I remember a conversation with you at one point, and I asked you, how much freedom do we actually have with this, and do you mind if we kind of go a bit out there? Meaning kind of a play performance, really. But I think it's really, I think, seeing the value of having absolutely no agenda and a blank space. It's very different to science, actually, which is quite structured, and actually that becomes a creative space where things just get organically created between collaboration with all three of us.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to show the whole story, which has been recorded by Erika. It is on our YouTube channel, so after today's event, then please do go and have a look. But we do have a short clip just to give you an impression and an idea about what it was, and then after that we'll go to questions, which we have a few from the audience. So please, can you show us the clip?
Viento tibio y dócil del valle, no me olvides. Llévate mi melancólico canto y avívalo en la cuerda de un violín, una flauta y un charango. Que la memoria de mi pueblo no me tenga hazaña, pues yo no quise acabar con el valle. Y que todos sepan que mi muerte no la he causado yo.
Very brief clip there. The story is only 10 minutes long, but please do go and watch the full story after the event. We've had some questions coming from people watching online. So Gemma, let's kick off with what has been a moment during your work that has given you hope for the future?
In my own research, I mean, I suppose this on the small scale, this Peruvian project really has, because it's starting to move beyond just diagnosing that there's a problem with glacier change and water quality and trying to think about the solutions to the problem. I don't find an enormous amount of hope at the moment in terms of how we're dealing with sort of carbon dioxide emissions and the projections for that. I mean, I find it fascinating that at the moment we're in the middle of a international pandemic and we've cut flying a lot and we've kind of reduced our fuel consumption considerably, and that actually I find it interesting that if there's a human value, a recognizable human value, we manage to make change. And I think that's what's interesting about this transmission program, is that there is human value in terms of attached to glacier change, because through their water supply and many other things as well, actually. But we need to somehow find stories and ways of communicating that value that then means we actually make the changes. So sometimes I see hope, but I also see a lot of frustration in terms of what we're doing at the moment on a global scale.
It does seem to be part of the problem, is that sort of that in general climate change is one of those it's very difficult to put your finger on exactly what is happening. It doesn't seem to be as immediate as perhaps this pandemic, and as a result is much easier just sort of put into the background. Let's take a second question then, Gemma. We all need to find innovative and imaginative and engaging ways to get our environmental and ecological messages across to our audiences. How do we move these ideas into general mainstream of engagement and education if we're not scientists or artists? And that's from Kez Rogers.
Well, I suppose I mean, I was lucky enough to be part of a program and had an opportunity to work with a storyteller on the other side of the world. I mean, there are other programs that you can kind of get involved with. I suppose had I not, that program for me was kind of a catalyst for doing something. I mean, I could, without Trans.MISSION, I mean, I could now go out there and say, actually, I'd like to do more science communication in a more radical way, in a more personal way, in a more kind of emotive way, and that's a decision up to me. And I really believe actually there's a communicator in all of us. We're human beings. We are communicators, and somewhat for different people that's a different type of communication. And if you know what that communication is, that what your style of communication is, then maybe there's a way to try new things. But I think it is a bit challenging. And as I say, I was privileged enough to be part of something bigger. But maybe we need more of those things.
I think you said you've built, since you've been back, you've started to get your students more engaged with storytelling and actually thinking about how they communicate science. And do you think this is something which the science degrees in general and science training in general is lacking? Is this ability to not only do the research but also find a way of telling people about it, or at least communicating it in a way which is understandable?
Yeah, I mean, I think science engagement, public engagement has really moved forwards though in the last 10 or 20 years. It is seen as a really important part of what we do now as scientists. But I think there's a second barrier. So I think for me, doing my acting on the stage at the Hay Festival, I actually didn't tell anyone about it because I thought I would be judged. I thought people think I was completely mad. I thought all sorts of things. And what was really interesting chatting to my wonderful students is that every single one of them was incredibly positive about it. And perhaps the perceptions of what we think is kind of risky and mad are not true, really. But I think there is, I mean, the fact that I felt nervous about it means that to some degree there are some views out there of people who would think, no, you should be focusing on doing the actual science. You haven't got time to do all this other stuff as well. But I think the landscape's changing, and I think science communication is becoming much more central to what we do now. And I sort of see that increasing going into the future.
I think you said you felt that that people might not think you were serious as a scientist if you also showed a different side.
Yeah, I was really worried about that, actually, and particularly as a sort of female scientist as well. I think I worried that sort of getting up on a stage wearing a blue hair and a white face and doing all sorts of crazy things, people might, I don't know, I thought it might in some way discredit some of the scientific things I'd done, and I was very, very nervous about that, and it was a big risk. And there were a few people who said to me, Gemma, that's a big risk you're taking, and maybe it was, but I think there are barriers. There are barriers that we perceive as barriers, and there are barriers that are actually barriers. And I think it's finding a way to get past those barriers, and for people to feel it's okay to try and find new ways to communicate what we do. And I think those stories are really important and really powerful.
Has it actually had an impact? I mean, a negative one? I mean, it's not been that long. I mean, it's been 6 months, I suppose. Have you experienced any negative feedback? No, actually. No, I mean, maybe I've got a self-selecting audience of people in terms of my colleagues and friendship group, but I know I've actually been really surprised. Every single person has been very positive about it. And I think they've said, God, a lot of them have said, my God, I would never in a million years manage to do that myself. But then I also thought, never in a million years I'd manage to do that. And I think what's interesting is you think you can't do something, and then you somehow manage to get up there and do it, and realise that perhaps your perceptions are different to the reality. But no, people have been really positive. So now I kind of, I think I'm on a roll now. I might do some more. I think that's really positive, and I think it's one of the messages certainly going out to those students who you're teaching, but also anyone who are watching out there now, is that you do have to take some risks and not be scared of potentially sort of looking, inverted commas, silly, because actually it's about communicating and engaging. If you can, we know from the performance you did in Arequipa that the Peruvian ambassador was there and then invited you all to go to the embassy in January to perform it again in front of the Prime Minister and the various ministers from the Peruvian government, as a way of actually getting those members of the government to actually see for themselves the potential impacts of these glacial melt on those areas. And I think we're hoping that the next stage is that actually when you go out there again after COVID is hopefully at some point removed, that you can actually take some of those ministers out and actually show them on the ground.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's what we'd like to happen next is to kind of build awareness that therefore we might be able to change something in that region. But again, I was really, really surprised so it was only in February actually we gave a performance at the UK Ambassador's House in Lima for a bunch of VIPs, ministers, etc. And what was really amazing was when in conversations with them afterwards that they got it. They absolutely got the message. And I would say that the performance we did in Arequipa and also later in Lima, of all the things I've done and stood up there and done on a stage, including scientific conferences and public lectures, I would say that performance, that play, has been by far the most powerful in terms of the feedback I've got, and people just suddenly understanding what the problem is and what the human dimension to that problem is and the urgency to doing something about it. And so, yeah, we're hoping that some things maybe start to move in Peru in trying to set in place some solutions to these water quality issues in the mountain regions of the Cordillera Blanca.
That would be amazing if we can get some movement off the back of this. We've got a very specific question here. It's very much a science related one. Are any flora or fauna found in the glacial ice core samples either dead or alive? Or any flora and fauna found in the glacial ice core samples either dead or alive when you do your samples?
Well, so this particular project we're mostly working on the rivers, not ice. So I guess I probably can't answer that question in relation to Peru, but I have worked on a lot of ice samples, bits of ice cores, ice from the bottom of glaciers. And that's a really interesting question, because within that ice, you might think ice is just a lump of ice and it's got a bit of mud in it, but it's clear ice. But within that ice, there are literally millions of microorganisms, and they're living in the little watery veins between the ice crystals, and they can live quite happily in there. So ice is actually this sort of living substance. It's alive, and also within that ice, because glaciers retreat and they expand, and when they do that, they often bulldoze over vegetation and plants, and so within that ice sometimes you get little bits of plant remains as well. So glacier ice is kind of an archive really of what's happened in our environment, but it's also a living ecosystem in its own right. It's full of millions and millions of microbes surviving against the odds and in tiny little liquid water veins between individual ice crystals. So I'm really interested in that actually.
And have you? It's what you obviously you're working in the Himalayas and Greenland as well. Is that where you're doing more of the drilling for samples as opposed to sort of runoff type work?
Yeah, so more on the ice sheets actually. We work a lot on the ice, particularly. So we were really interested in knowing what's at the bottom of the Antarctic ice sheet. So one project that we're involved with British Antarctic Survey at the moment is they've drilled all the way from the top of the ice sheet to the bottom of the ice sheet, and we've got bits of ice and sediments from there, and we're really interested in what could be possibly surviving in that very extreme environment, and is it doing anything useful or not useful, actually potentially harmful. But yeah, so we've done quite a lot of work on ice in mostly Greenland and in Antarctica actually.
Have you found anything down the bottom? At the bottom of the glacier yet?
The bottom of the Antarctic ice sheet. Well, if it hadn't been for COVID, I might be able to answer that question. We were literally about to get the samples and bring them into the lab and look for what's in there. We found some microbes in there, yeah, from a very quick sample that a colleague of mine analysed for. So I'm absolutely certain there'll be life. What I'd like to know is how on earth is it surviving and what's it doing. So yeah, watch this space.
That's great. I mean, you mentioned COVID again, and clearly it's impacting on lots of research. It's obviously stopped research taking place, which was going on, and it's made massive changes to the way in which we operate as a society. Do you see any opportunities coming off the back of this? It's been clearly had a massive impact negatively on lots of people, but we're facing huge problems with climate change. We know we have to make big change. Lots of governments have signed up to hitting a reduction in CO2 emissions by 2030 or 2050, depending on which ones they are. But there's been little or very slow action taken. Often it's been said that we can't make action, we can't go too quickly. And this has demonstrated actually we can just say actually stop. So do you see any real opportunities coming off the back of this, and also what's the best for the audience watching here? What would be the best way for them to try to capitalise on that and make sure that we just don't go back to living as we used to?
Yeah, no, I was going back to what I was saying earlier. It's just really interesting to see how we've suddenly cut air travel and we're not driving around in our cars and our fuel consumption has gone through the floor, really, and we can do it. We can actually do it. If the human need to do it is sort of deemed great enough, really. And I think there will be changes. I mean, we've all suddenly realised that we can manage a lot of our work stuff through video calls, as painful as that is sometimes. Certainly in science, there have been entire conferences that have been rolled out virtually now, whereas before people would have been flying all around the world. There's also a lot of stress associated with that. So, I don't think the world is going to be the same place after this. And I think we will definitely learn things. And it is interesting to think about, well, what could we do that would be for the good of the climate as a result of that? And in terms of individual action, there's a growing amount of evidence that sort of collective individual action is important. And it's the same things that everyone will always say at the moment. But, it's, drive your car less, don't get on so many international long haul flights or even just flights. And you can see at the moment how people just getting on less flights and jumping in less cars has sort of really dropped the energy demands and fossil fuel demands and problems happening with oil prices and everything. But, individual action, which is what we're seeing at the moment, this collective individual action. People aren't flying, people aren't driving their cars. It does make a difference. So, yeah, I think hopefully it'll have some positive impact for climate, even if it's negative impact in many, many other ways right at the moment.
Well, there we go. Thank you. It's nice to end on a hopefully positive note, Gemma. Thanks you so much, Gemma, for joining us. Thank you, Raul and Erika, for joining us on video. Thank you all who are watching at home or wherever you're watching for joining. Please do go and watch the YouTube video of Erika's story. We will be having another Transmission II event tomorrow morning and also on Monday morning with the Colombian and UK elements of the project, and launching the new story in UK and also the animation which we've been doing with Chris Horton. I'd like to thank NERC, Natural Environment Research Council, once again for partnering with us on this, and I hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for joining us.